Think of this analogy. You're walking down the street and you constantly stub your big toe, okay? I can inject it with all kinds of lidocaine and painkillers and everything, bandage it up, but until we address the gait problem, that toe's never going to heal up because you're going to keep picking the scab and stubbing it. So I say it's no different with your back. If you're constantly causing the injury over and over, it doesn't matter what I shoot into it, doesn't matter what we do to brace it, doesn't matter what we do, anything, until we address the issue and the injury mechanism and take that away, and then we allow to rebuild athleticism.
Hello and welcome to the Limit Slayer podcast, brought to you by limitslayer.com. I'm your host, Nick Ritchie, here to help you look, feel, and perform better than ever, so you can unleash your potential, become your best possible self, and discover life without limits. We're joined today by special guest Brian Carroll for episode 151 of the Limit Slayer podcast. Brian embodies the saying, "It's not over until you quit." Three-time world's strongest man, Bill Kazmaier, wrote the foreword to his new book and says that Brian's story is truly inspiring as it demonstrates the power of sound rehabilitation. My own mentor and former co-host, Chris Young, before he was taken away early by leukemia, called Brian a true gentleman, and a lot of other good things back in MightyCast, episode 107. Three things about Brian that stand out to me the most are that he has squatted over 1,000 pounds in competition over 50 times. He has multiple world records in 3 different weight classes, totaling over 10 times his body weight in powerlifting competitions. And Brian is chock full of wisdom. In this interview, we're going to cover Brian's transformation from the lowest of lows to the highest of highs, from sitting in his car, considering eating a bullet, to getting pain-free and stronger than ever. We're going to look at his book, the big ideas that you can take away from it, and the details that make a difference. We'll talk about a 90-year-old woman that got to stay in her house because she was able to fix her back pain with some basic powerlifting 101. And we're going to look at how this information has impacted both of our lives, and leave you with some takeaways that can change your life for the better, forever, if you implement them. And now, let's get to our guest. Hey Brian, how you doing?
I've been doing well, Nick. Thanks for having me. It's been really right at 3.5 years. It's kind of hard to believe how fast time has flown. Hope everything's been well with you.
Yeah, I don't know if you know, but last time you were kind of my surprise birthday present. My birthday's on the 19th, and you were on the show on, I think, the 17th or so.
Oh, really?
It was pretty fun. Yeah.
So he surprised you with that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. So I was tickled pink, and then when I saw your new book here come out, I was tickled pink again. So looking forward to getting into that with you a bit today.
Sounds good, man. Ready to do it.
Well, I think we should start off probably with what happened, because I know you were starting the recovery process the last time we talked. You had some videos going onto YouTube with Dr. McGill, and I was watching those, kind of following along, and we're all just kind of crossing our fingers, rooting for you. But man, you had a hell of an injury, which the book goes into quite a bit. The book is The Gift of Injury by Brian Carroll and Dr. Stu McGill. And you had tell me if I'm wrong here, but an L5 was crushed, and you had a split sacrum. For our readers that don't know what that means, I think it's like we all know what a donut is, and a crushed vertebrae is kind of like a crushed donut, like if you're just a step on that thing, and the split sacrum is kind of like if you took a bite out of it.
Yeah, it's a substantial injury, and I wasn't aware that it was that bad until I got up to Canada that day. But the sacrum is the foundation of your spine, and if you don't have a strong foundation, you don't have anything. So obviously that was not just going to only cause me problems in powerlifting, but day-to-day life. So it had to be addressed. And in Gift of Injury, we give you the good, the bad, the ugly, top to bottom, everything we did, and to beat this injury and to make it back. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you were looking at, when you were going to the other doctors, they were saying you might never lift again. You might have to have a spinal fusion. You tried some pain meds. Those things, have diminishing returns. Obviously, you were kind of down in the ruts. Could you tell us, you kept looking, though, for another option, and one of your friends, I believe, helped you out a bit.
Yeah, so I went through the whole process of the Americanized medicine, however you want to put it, the traditional approach of you start off with a referral to a physical therapist or you work with a PT for a while, and then you go up the ladder each time. Then you do injections, and then the injections don't work, and the insurance is billed enough out. Then you can start talking to surgeons, and then when insurance feels or sees fit that you get back surgery, you end up getting a back surgery, and that's the process that they herd people through like cattle, unfortunately. So I wasn't going to just accept the word that I was done, and the fact that the only route to being healthy again was a spinal fusion, because I met with these doctors, and there's a few issues with that. Number one, they only have about 15, 20 minutes with you tops. So how much do you really think you can assess not only a person's injury, but what they're about in 15 minutes? You can't really tell much of anything. Hell, it takes a while to understand what is going on with someone. So the assessment that the doctor performs, when he's going to decide to do surgery on you or not, just looking at the MRIs, it's a pretty scary thing looking back. Now that I know how much time it actually takes to diagnose the pain trigger, and the fact that you can actually beat it with surgery with proper movement patterns and proper stabilization. So one of my clients, after I was having all these disappointing run-ins with the doctors, he told me about Dr. McGill and reminded me that he's up in Canada by him, that I should shoot him an email. So I shot Dr. McGill an email in the spring of 2013, and we started a dialogue. I ended up calling him up and setting up an appointment to go see him in May of 2013, and we worked together on that day, and pretty much Dr. McGill followed the same prognosis as the doctors, that I could get out of pain. The doctor's version of getting me out of pain was surgery, obviously, because when all you have is a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. So that's all they do. Yeah, so it's not digging on all surgeons or doctors, but unfortunately that's the job they're in, and sometimes it doesn't work out all that well for the patient. So the doctor said that I'm not going to lift anymore, and I shouldn't lift, yada yada, the whole nine. I guess kind of telling me in some ways what they're trying to do, and that they would not even do a surgery on me unless I committed to stop lifting. So we know the flaws with that, because if I can't lift, are we just going to solve it by saying, okay, we're going to fuse you together and you're not going to lift? Well, what about the rest of my life? What about the little bit of spine mobility that I'll need for day-to-day activities? I'm not saying I'm going to be a ballerina or a gymnast, but where I'm going with that. I don't want to be fused together for the rest of my life if I can avoid it. So Dr. McGill did agree that I needed to stop lifting, and he said the following: Brian, if you're my son, I would urge you to retire and not remain or not continue to push towards being a powerlifter again. I would urge you to retire. And I said, okay, that's fine. But you did say that you do not believe the doctor's prognosis that you can help get me pain free. Because even the doctors were a little bit grim about it, but that was their solution. So Stu said that I can get you out of pain most likely, but I would urge you to enjoy the life of being pain free once again and not risk it all just to compete in powerlifting again. And so I looked at my wife and I said, well, Rhea, if I do become pain free, you know what I'm going to do. And she kind of nodded her head. And I said, Stu, if I become pain free, I'm going to lift again. And said, okay, let's get you pain free. And you do everything right, and you beat the odds. You come back up here in 6 months and we'll talk about it. And he says, who knows? Maybe you're right. Maybe we end up writing a book about it.
And that was that, right?
that was it in a nutshell. That's how it started. A little over 4.5 years ago, and I haven't looked back since. So it's pretty cool. It sounds like kind of a made up story, but that's about how it went.
Yeah, well, it is really one of those. It's almost like a Rocky story, I thought, because he's kind of down in the dumps, and then he's got the upcoming thing, and he gets back to the top. And I know in your book you go into a bit more detail. I don't want to do it too much, but I mean, basically you were thinking of, we all have dark thoughts when things are bad, and you're sitting there, you got your what was it, a Glock in the glove compartment, or? Yeah,
so it was a pretty dark time. I just left the third doctor in just a couple of days, third surgeon, and it was a whole shenanigans with them, of course. And so I was pretty frustrated at that point, because I just wanted some kind of positive direction, like whether it was surgery or not, or some kind of definitive solution. So yeah, for a couple of minutes, I definitely considered going a different route with the rest of my life, if you will. But I wisely only let that be a thought and not any kind of action. So I ended up becoming a little more headstrong and a little more determined after that. And I'm sure a lot of people that have had severe back pain can relate to those dark moments.
Yeah, well, I think anybody who's been, just at wit's end with pain can pretty much relate to, if you don't got your health, as the saying goes, if you ain't got your health, you ain't got nothing, right? It's
Sure.
you really appreciate your health when it's the worst, right? You really want it back. And
Your body's a limited resource. When you think you're in your teens, your 20s, and even your 30s, like I did, you think, man, this athleticism lasts forever. I'll always feel this good. I'll always be this strong. I'll always be this agile. I'll always have this much energy. Well, that's not the way it works, because if that were the case, people would be running around lifting these kind of weights in their 70s.
Definitely. And I think you make a really good distinction in the book, too, between your biological age and your training age. So your biological age, I believe you were born in 81.
Yep.
But I would say your training age compared to most people around your age.
61.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll get into what you decided to do for health and happiness a little bit later, but I think you definitely made a good choice there. So you talked about a few things that I haven't heard in some of the other interviews. You went into it in the book, but I mean, the system is kind of, I am all pro-medicine. I know with my former partner who would be on the podcast were he here, he was big into skepticism. He was big into following the medical, procedures that are backed by evidence and so forth. But that being said, you hit on a kind of a sore spot, which is there is a system, there is a pipeline, and it's kind of, you have a track when you do go into the medical field, and you kind of follow that. It's like, if you have back pain, you're going to see how severe it is, and then it's probably going to end up in surgery. And it's really kind of refreshing, because I was talking to like one of my friends and several friends and several family members in the last couple of weeks, and they're like, so what kind of surgery did he get? What drugs was he on? This, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, yeah, no surgery. The rehab process, to my understanding, didn't really involve a lot of drugs, maybe some painkillers. But, it's there wasn't surgery, and they were just floored by the fact that your spine was in the condition it was in and that it recovered. So actually, this is skipping ahead a little bit here, but would you like to talk a little bit about the bone callousing process? Was that just happening through proper loading and recovery, or did that involve some kind of electrical stimulation or anything like that?
Okay, so let me preface this with number one. It's not me just digging on doctors as a whole. I have doctors that are friends and close friends, actually, but they understand the flaws in the system, and it works for a lot of people, but unfortunately, a lot of people it doesn't work so well for, and they end up on painkillers. None of my rehab contained any kind of medication, opiates, or any kind of anti-inflammatory drugs above some occasional ibuprofen, or I've taken Voltaren before. But that's more for my hip arthritis and my knees, especially at this point. So, it was one of those things that Dr. McGill, the bone callousing, he experimented on with a couple of lifters or people before, but none of them were trying to come back to bear so much load. Once again, it was just going to be more body weight, day-to-day stuff. And then, of course, loading with 1,000 pounds, of pressure on your back is quite a bit different. So it's one thing, and it's also and I want to echo this too, as I've said on other interviews. This book is not just for someone who wants to lift a bunch of weight. It's a far outside the box story of someone who got out of pain that was not supposed to be and returned to athletic endeavors. So all the more reason for the person that's a stay-at-home mom or the dad that can't pick his son up out of the crib anymore without back pain, all the more reason for them to understand if they do the right things and they move well and they rebuild that athleticism and they're back again, they'll be able to do these things. So it's not a death sentence. I just took it to the way extreme. So all the more reason for the person that isn't trying to, that they can accomplish this. So let me just say that. But the bone callousing, Stu could explain the science a lot better, and in the book the science is explained pretty thoroughly. But basically we give enough stimulation for the bones to lay down scaffolding to fill in those breaks there and to rebuild and remold and remodel. So over time, proper progressions of deadlifts and squats and carries and things of that nature helped everything gristle and build back up. But the biggest thing was not working in any pain and not trying to go too much load too fast. So we varied our intensities very nicely, like I outlined in 1020 Life, my strength training book, and we really took our time rebuilding it. I mean, when I started back squatting again, I started back with 65 pounds on the squat, and that was a barbell back squat that I just squatted 1185 at one time. So I really started over as a beginner. So the biggest thing was dropping the ego, listening to Dr. McGill, because he was the expert in this field, and letting him do his thing. And fortunately, one of these experiments worked with the bone callousing. And this book is basically a giant case study on this.
And as you mentioned, it's an excellent case study because not only were you, I mean, again, this is helpful for everybody, not just world-class athletes, but what it shows is that you can go from essentially being in worse case than, a grandmother that just fell down and fractured her back to, squatting 1,100 pounds again. And so, I mean, if your goal isn't to squat 1,100 pounds, it kind of goes without saying, if you're just doing bodyweight activities, you can probably improve at least to that point.
Yeah, that's a quite easier goal to accomplish, just getting back to the normal day-to-day stuff. But I think one thing that people should keep in mind is all of us are athletes. Our goals are just different. Someone's athlete might be a really good athletic goal might be a really fast landscaper outside and do a lot of volume with cutting yards, or someone might be trying to be, excel in some other job, be fit or whatever it is, be a really good personal trainer. So they have to treat their body and not use it up doing things that are going to damage it. So we want to be cautious of the things that we do, always being mindful if we're picking something up, we're bracing, we're utilizing that lifter's wedge. I mean, it started off with me when I was coming back from injury. I would lean on the sink with one hand and I would brush my teeth and do a hip hinge. So I think if everyday people treat themselves as athletes and really try to be the best at what they're doing and with good movement, day to day ingrained, I really think that it would help a lot of people stay out of the rehab purgatory if they would think of themselves as simply an athlete.
Definitely. It's, again, like you talked about putting your hand on, doing a hip hinge when brushing your teeth. I've been doing that for years just because I thought, why would I not keep my spine integrity while I'm doing these basic activities like brushing my teeth, but that's like a common one where you'll the first few times you kind of catch yourself and you're like, just tighten a little bit down there and then we're good. But it's everything.
Same thing. And like, I talked about the landscaper or the person that's trying to be, a great roofer or contractor. It doesn't matter how good they are at something if they're hurt and beat up and can no longer do it. So it's a matter of just taking care of your body and just being mindful with everything that you do every day. And I'm not saying that you can't have some fun, but there has to be a pros and cons. Juice has to be worth the squeeze in everything we do, instead of just kind of being reckless and then wondering why we're feeling like we're 80 when we're 40.
That's a hard ask for a lot of things. I mean, if you've ever moved things around on your desk and you reach for where your pen used to be and it's now in a different position, you can do that for a year and go, okay, it's in the drawer, move things around your kitchen, you reach for a glass and it's somewhere else. It takes a while, especially, and I don't think people give themselves enough slack. People are really hard on themselves for something that's just a very common human behavior. It's part of our patterning. That's how our brain works. It does shortcuts. And there's no reason to feel down on yourself. Just when you see an opportunity to improve, take it, right?
Yeah, so it's the whole withdrawals and deposits analogy. You make too many withdrawals out of your bank account, what happens? You end up bouncing or overdrafting or going bankrupt. Same thing with, you can be athletically bankrupt. And you don't have to be an athlete. Again, your body can just be flat worn out. Start treating it better, make some deposits back in it, and you'll be pleasantly surprised at what can happen.
So I know Chris Duffin, you're familiar with him. I think a lot of his guys have the word anti-fragile on him, but there's this book series by this guy called Nassim Taleb, and he talks about anti-fragility. I thought, like when I see the anti-fragile logo on a lot of their stuff, I think about that book all the time because it's all about breaking down and rebuilding stronger than ever. And that seems like a lot of what you did with the spine here and so forth. But it's a delicate balance to strike, because you break too much, then you can be out of commission or require surgery or something like that.
I did reference Duffin there, and we want to build anti-fragile strength. We don't want to be scared of load or movement, but we want to stabilize and minimize the risks of what we do and build resilience, over time, slowly building it up. The porridge is not too cold and the porridge is not too hot. You want it just right. Well, you need to start with especially with athletes or someone coming back from injury, or your $1 million athletes or your general population, whoever it is. You start with somewhere right in the middle, because you don't want to do too much for no reason, especially if they're going to make gains off a small amount, and you obviously don't want to hurt them, but you don't want to do so little that they're not making any gains and wasting their time. So it's all about finding that sweet spot, and it directly applies to the bone callousing and rebuilding, and the anti-fragile analogy you made there earlier about the cup and the cat. I mean, it's one of those things that it's got to be just right. And it takes time to do that, but always err on the side of caution is the way I put it.
Yeah, you don't want any career-ending injuries, especially if you're a beginner. I think it's the top and the bottom, like the absolute newbies and the world-class athletes that seem to overdo it one way or another. So you actually had a great section about ego, but let's get to that in a minute. I wanted to jump back, if we could, for just a second, because we talked a little bit about Stu. I'd like to talk about him just a little bit more, because I really love how you paired with him, and then you really have the best of both the science and the practice in this book. Because, well, first, I'll get back into that, but first, could you tell us a little bit about Stu, so our listeners who aren't familiar with him will know a bit more?
Yeah, Dr. Stuart McGill is out of Waterloo, Canada. He was a professor there for about 33 years. He taught, he was over the whole science department, actually, I believe. Kinesiology and spine biomechanics is his background. And he's worked with some of the top athletes in the world, a lot of them that we can't talk about. Some are pretty public, like a George St. Pierre or Blaine Sumner, that have come out and given him credit for a lot of the work that he's done with them. And obviously, I've worked with him, and I know countless other athletes and colleagues of mine that are just powerlifters have worked with him. But he is the authority on low back pain causes and disorders and rehab. And we paired up, and like you said, his science complements my real world validity and my the methods that I've kind of come up with over time. And I've interfused a lot of the things that he's taught me through this process, and kind of made me a complete lifter when I was lacking a few things. I was a little sloppy with some things that I talk about, and I wasn't so cerebral with my approach at all times. But he helped kind of fill in those gaps for me a bit. And Stu is he's one of my mentors, and he's a mentor to a lot of people. And actually, he was just over in the UK not long ago doing his courses. So his website's BackFit Pro if you want to read more about him. He's got a couple of really good books too. I think the most popular one right now is Back Mechanic. That's a great book, but the guy's just a genius.
Yeah, that's one that I really want to get in and read in the future now that I've seen it referenced so many times. But basically, that's who he is. Not only is the book called Back Mechanic, but that's pretty much who he is. I mean, just like you got a problem with your car, you go into the car mechanic, you have a problem with your back, you go to Stu and he fixes you up, kind of a thing. As long as, obviously, you have to do your part and not overdo it and all that stuff. Porridge, not too hot, not too cold.
Right.
I love that analogy. That's great.
Yeah, but, I just mumbled that out one time at a seminar, and I stuck with it.
Yeah, it's always about how can we make this stuff relatable to people so they can latch onto it, remember it, and then hopefully use it in the future, so it's not just abstract. So that's kind of why I brought up you and Stu, because, again, the marriage of the science and then the practice. I mean, because of his position and the books he's written and how he's helped clinicians and so forth, people who, really latch onto the science will go, oh, okay, this book has some credibility, whereas you're just a strong dude to them. So they love to see the science behind it. But a lot of people are also skeptical of science. They're like, everybody's pulling their shit from PubMed, cherry picking, all this crap, and putting it together to do something that supports their conclusions that they made beforehand, right? So then they see you actually implementing this and it working. And it's like, oh, great. So now I know that this stuff works because this guy used it. And then everybody who can kind of appreciate both, it's like, wow, that's a really, really powerful synergy.
Yeah, Stu ran the lab there at Waterloo for 30 years and conducted countless experiments and studies, hundreds. And that's where he learned. And then he would test it in the clinic. He'd have the lab there and the clinic next door. and he would test things with his athletes and injured people, and it turned out really well, as you can see.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd like to really get into some of these details a bit more in the next episode, but let's talk a bit more about your book here, if you're all right to move on to that.
Sure.
So we already talked a little bit about the injury and so forth. At the start of the book, in section 1, we're talking about your early years. There was all these great little lessons that I kind of learned from my mentor, who was Chris, and you had your own mentor who was, I believe, Skip Sylvester. And a lot of the same advice, and like I believe Jonathan Bird also lifts with you down there quite often. But like a couple things like strength is a great equalizer, eat a lot and train heavy. I mean, we love these things. It's just kind of like common knowledge that goes around there. It's kind of in the making of a lifter. And I think we both feel the same about bodybuilding. Can I pull up a quote that you said about bodybuilding? I mean, I love bodybuilders. Those are tough sons of bitches to do what they do, but I believe you said there was nothing appealing to me about eating super small amounts, sucking myself down, than prancing around on stage feeling like death.
Yeah. I did a couple of bodybuilding shows, and it just wasn't fun because it's, you don't eat much, you feel bad. The diet's the hardest part. The training isn't hard. So yeah, I don't miss that.
Yeah. I've tried that a little bit, and it's getting super lean, not so fun. Like 4-pack, fine, just lift heavy, eat good, don't eat too sloppy, and you're fine. But getting super lean, no fun, just no fun.
It's a whole nother level. It's a whole nother level of care and maintenance, like 24 hours a day.
I saw your picture also when you were 17, and you were benching more than I do now at 33.
Yeah,
I was a little envious.
I didn't focus too much on the squat and the deadlift at that point. I was just benching 3 or 4 days a week, which was ridiculous. But, you do a lot of silly things in high school. You follow suit, but a lot of things didn't really make sense to me, so I stopped doing them.
Yeah. Powerlifting's not for everyone, right? But you love it. I love it. We've all got our own things. And like you said, you got to just be mindful. Where is that going to put you if you're not using right form? Got to be aware 24/7.
Yep, exactly.
All right. I wanted to go into, just for our listeners, I mentioned the Johari window very quickly in the outline, because you talked about when you were having difficulties with your back and so forth, you said you'd done literally everything you knew how to do, just everything. And then when you don't know what to do, a very helpful tool is something called the Johari window, which is, if people draw like a little 2x2 matrix on their paper, you've got things at the top. There are things that you know, and then there are things that you know that you don't know. Like a lot of people, I'm a math teacher, and they're like, when they hear that, they're like, oh, I don't know math at all. So like they know that they don't know math, right? So you've got things you know, things that you know you don't know. And then there's other people on the other side of the grid. So you've got others, things that they know about you, and things that they don't know about you, like private information, secrets, whatever. But there's things that there's these 4 boxes then, and one of the boxes is things that others know about you that you don't know about yourself.
Interesting.
So there's the guy at the party, right? That's just a total, weird dude. Everybody's like, kind of stay away from him, but he doesn't know he's a weird dude.
Yeah, that's always awkward.
Yeah, so you got like that guy, right? But it's not just, social skills and parties and stuff. It's knowledge gaps and so forth. And so you were kind of like, look, I've done everything I know. I've talked the people that I know in my network, they don't seem to have something for me. And so you kind of to get your answers, you've got to get outside of your network, which you ended up doing. You ended up going to Dr. McGill, and then you found out some stuff that he knew about you, about bracing and so forth, and these various little things to help you recover that you didn't know about yourself. And I just wanted to highlight that, because when people don't know what to do, often they'll just throw up their hands and give up. And that's, it ain't over till you quit. But if you quit, it's over.
Right, exactly. So I was definitely on the cusp of getting desperate, and there was things that I simply didn't know that were pointed out to me when I met Stu in his lab clinic that day that were just, I knew, but I just didn't realize I wasn't doing them properly. It's kind of when someone tells you you've been a jackass for a while. You've kind of noticed it, but not enough to do something about it. That's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. And we've all felt that before, definitely. It's like, I was such a dick.
Yeah, it's like, maybe I thought I was rude. Oh, well, actually, you said this and you said that. Then next thing, people are letting you know how you acted. You're like, oh my God, yeah, you're right. It was like an intervention, for me, mentally and physically. with Stu, just reminding me that I started over as a beginner. I wasn't too big. My ego was not too large to start completely over and act like I knew nothing. So I went in there with a clear, a fresh slate, clean slate.
Yeah, and good on you, because that takes. I mean, people get caught up in their egos and their pride, and that's why they often continue to get injured over and over and over and over again. And some people never learn. They never learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Sad to see, but you can't help everybody.
Yeah. You said it in the book, your source of frustration was just realizing that there were many flaws and they were perfectly avoidable, as well as once he brought them to your attention, it seemed obvious. And one of the quotes that I like, I'm not going to get it right off the top of my head here, but it's basically a wise person just sees the obvious. Something to that effect.
Right. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that I was doing that were so obvious once pointed out. And a couple of my injury, my pain causes and injury mechanisms were flexion under load, and I was compression intolerant. So I was always either sitting or standing in flexion, or I was loading my back in compression awkwardly, doing the normal things day to day, whether it was picking something up off the floor, tying my shoes, grabbing something, opening the door, brushing my teeth, like I said earlier, lifting the toilet seat. It was things that he pointed out that I didn't think had any bearing on my athleticism. And that was like, why didn't I think of this? Of course, every day when I do this, it hurts my back. Why didn't I stop doing that?
Yeah, and I know in other interviews, Stu likened it to like picking a scab. I mean, you've got some inflammation, no doubt, going on there and stuff, and every time you do that, it's just like picking the scab, and it's not going to heal if you keep picking the scab.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that people like to do to pick the scab, even on purpose, because they think it feels good. So if you have a scab on your palm or your top of your hand and you scratch it, you're scratching it because it itches and it feels good to scratch it. Well, the problem is you're not going to let it heal. So when Stu talks about the silly stretches or whatever for someone with a low back disorder, and they're blindly doing stretches thinking that they're going to heal the back by stretching it out, it feels good for a little while, but you're just picking the scab. So that's one way when people are actually thinking they're helping, but they're hurting themselves. An analogy I give in a lot of my talks when I'm speaking to athletes or coaches is think of this analogy. You're walking down the street and you constantly stub your big toe, okay? I can inject it with all kinds of lidocaine and painkillers and everything, bandage it up, but until we address the gait problem, that toe's never going to heal up because you're going to keep picking the scab and stubbing it. So I say it's no different with your back. If you're constantly causing the injury over and over, it doesn't matter what I shoot into it, doesn't matter what we do to brace it, doesn't matter what we do, anything, until we address the issue and the injury mechanism and take that away, and then we allow to rebuild athleticism.
Yep, I think that hits the nail on the head there, and I hate stubbing my toe.
Yes, doesn't feel good.
No fun. Yeah, so section 1 was all about you and kind of your story, how you became a lifter, and part 2 was all about recovery and building resilience. Wow, there were a lot. There's a lot in section 2 there, with all the moves and the exercises and all the little cues for doing that stuff, for building stiffness and stability. One thing I noticed that wasn't mentioned, so there are the big 3 from McGill, which we'll get into in a minute, but one thing that wasn't mentioned was, like, I saw some of your YouTube videos where he had you doing some modifications, like where you had the reverse curl up, and he had you doing the opposite arm and leg to do some neural firing, trying to move just right around the joint there and so forth. Were there a lot of things like that were not in the book, or just a couple things specific to you?
There was just a couple things that we just thought would get a little too convoluted, and it's something we could leave for a second edition. Or we were just running short on space as far as keeping the integrity of each section. So there was a couple things we had to kind of put out and save for the next edition. But honestly, I don't do the reverse curl up, McGill curl up with the neuromuscular pulse much. He was kind of just showing me that for my own use if I wanted to kind of up the ante a little bit with the curl up. But I'm so not good at those. Once I got good at them, I hated them so much because they kicked my butt that I started doing stir the pot. So I progressed to stir the pot, which is for me was a little bit more. It was better for a powerlifter needing that stability and not any really flexion. So I kind of had a built-in excuse, but it was backed by a little bit of science there. So yeah, so I kind of snaked my way around that one. I'll still do curl ups, but I get more bang for my buck by doing some high repetition stir the pots.
I was surprised with the reverse curl a little bit because I mean literally you're like an inch off the ground when you do it right. I was going when I first tried them, I went a little too high and I didn't get the same thing. Like you just get that little tiny when you do it right, that isometric that contraction against yourself. My God, it tears you apart.
Yes, and you don't need to move the cervical spine hardly at all to do that.
No,
so it's just enough to get a little bit of motion or a little bit of stiffness going. You want to push out laterally in your abdominals and make them stiff. So that's what it's about, that neuromuscular contraction. And there's a place for it, obviously, in powerlifting, and everyone should be doing it that has back pain as part of the three-pronged attack. McGill curl up, the rolling plank, and then, of course, the bird dog. But anyway, yeah, I still do them as part of my warm-up, but I don't push the ante up with them.
Yeah. And then section 3 was all about the blueprint and action. And it was really good to see your progression there and how it, for people who haven't read 10/20 Life, definitely pick that book up. I'd probably buy that after Gift of Injury if this seems relevant, but obviously it's whatever's most relevant to the listener. It was really interesting reading 10/20 Life and then going to see this recovery blueprint and then a couple little tweaks and see how things evolved over time with the jumbos and the combos and all that fun stuff that have to change, I think, kind of by necessity as your training age at least goes up. Again, biological age doesn't matter when it comes to training. So the 10/20 Life is a philosophy, so it's ever changing, ever evolving, and some things I've gotten wrong, some things I've gotten really right, and some things I wanted to expand upon and give more options with as we tested. You know, it's always it's ever growing for sure. And it also went into the Arnold in 2014, which was about 10 months. So I mean, you were in this sorry state, and then 10 months later, here you are gearing up, lifting just crazy weights. And I was really impressed by, and you talk about it, how the thought process was going on. Why don't you tell our listeners what you were thinking before, let's say, your final deadlift attempt there? Because you nailed the squat, you hit the bench, and then things weren't quite feeling right in your back.
Yeah, so 10 months later, after seeing Dr. McGill the first time, I started progressing forward and was competing in the 2014 Arnold XPC to win that thing again. And I was ahead on the squat and the bench, and I didn't even need a very big deadlift. And as I was warming up, the little bit of load on the squat and then the extreme extension on the bench got my back a little bit irritated. So when I went to deadlift that evening, it didn't feel right. So I shut it down and took a token deadlift, even though I could have got first place with around a first attempt deadlift. And that was another growing point for me. It was very hard because I knew that, okay, I could go out there one time and pull a weight, secure the win, and then sit back and hope that there wasn't too much damage from that one deadlift. But then I thought back to the time how much pain I was in this meet just a year before. And at that point, it was a pretty easy decision to shut it down, even though it hurt.
And I think practicing what you preach, telling people not to overdo it. Again, when people are beginners and when they're elite, when something's on the line, that's when you want to push it the most. So like just seeing that restraint, I mean, I think that just speaks volumes about your character. Just my jaw dropped. Like that was really impressive to me.
Thank you. It was like I said, it was a tough time for me because I knew, just because you're doing the right thing doesn't mean it feels good at the time.
No.
There's a lot of things we've had to do that we didn't want to do, but it was clearly the right thing. So there's still some emotional consequence there, but I got through it and we got a better plan together, and the rest is history.
Yep. And I think the last part for that section that people will be interested in, but I think it always gets blown out of proportion, is the weight loss bit. Several years ago, I made a little course on weight loss and so forth, and I talked about the mismatch between like going into the doctor who's 100 pounds overweight and them giving you advice on how to lose weight and so forth. And you went in and you had kind of the same kind of thing. They talked about the caution against the lifting and so forth, but they're not like, dude, you almost weigh 300 pounds. that might be affecting your joints and so forth. Could you tell us just a little bit about some common sense weight loss?
Yeah, so if you're injured, you got bad knees, bad hips, bad back, the first thing you need to look at it, if you're overweight, especially dependent on what your goal is, you need to look at yourself and say, man, what's the average person weighing that's doing the same endeavor that I'm after, or job that I'm doing or whatever, and do a real self-assessment, be self-aware. So one big thing with me is, I'd gotten bigger and fatter, since I was hurt and wasn't lifting as much. I would think instead of the whole lifting bit, they would have went like right for the jugular right away and said, hey man, you're awful big. A bigger guy is generally going to be a little rougher on his spine than a smaller guy. So they would have said, why don't you try to do a little bit of dieting, and kind of pointed me in that direction. And if they would have done that, who knows? I might have started to solve at least a little bit of that myself. So one of the solutions for me after the failed Arnold 14 comeback was dropping some body weight and then coming back down to 242, where I ended up winning the Arnold in 2015, and I've won it a couple times since, actually, as well.
Yeah, you got into some great shape there and looking good, lifting like a monster. That was excellent. And I'm glad you seem to be feeling better at the lower weight class.
Oh, for sure. I feel great. The weight cut does suck. I talk about that a little bit with the glycogen depletion and water loading and all that good stuff. But it did suck cutting weight, but day to day being 25 plus pounds lighter just felt so much better on my back and body. And it was the missing piece in many ways of my final recovery.
And I'll mirror that with like my father, who's, getting up there in years. And when he loses weight, if he gains weight, his knees will start hurting. He loses it again just fine, because actually, when you're, if you do anything like he went to a dance one night and his knees just were wrecked the next day. Because anytime you're doing any kind of impact like that, it's several times your body weight. And it's really, really tough on the joints just from your weight and gravity. Yeah.
So that night he was a dancing athlete, man.
Yep.
He was pulling some athleticism out that his body didn't want to give him.
Yep. Final section for the book, and then I think we'll wrap up this first episode, is all about training wisdom, and there is a ton in there. Wow. I just wanted to mention, we've already talked a little bit about thinking like an athlete, moving like an athlete 24/7, because there's 168 hours a week outside the gym. One of the things I didn't see mentioned was sleep. I was curious because we spend a lot of time sleeping, did you talk to him at all about sleeping postures on your back, on your side, on your belly? Did he discuss that with you at all?
Yeah, we did. And my exception was I wear a CPAP, so I can't sleep on my belly. And
Gotcha.
That's optimal for those, especially with the back histories, to sleep on their belly. So I was kind of stuck. I would lie side lying a lot of the time with the pillow between my knees. Mm-hmm. And that was the most comfortable. On my back is probably the least comfortable. But I still do fine with it. Maybe a little bit of support under my lower back. I know on BackFit Pro they sell a few different back cushions. I have one here in my seat that's you just pump up to fit the curve of your spine, and it kind of meets it there and makes a sitting dynamic instead of falling into a little bit of flexion or putting stress on your back. So I never experimented with any of the pads for the bed because I didn't really need them. But ideally, I would be laying on my stomach, but I just can't do it with my CPAP mask.
Yeah, I enjoyed sleeping on my stomach most of my life, but I'm curious, do you know the proper form? Do you put a leg out? Anything about, I'm kind of maybe barking up the wrong tree here. I should be talking to McGill about that. Yeah.
I don't know. Whatever feels comfortable is what I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Because like there's this old like grandmother wisdom, like don't sleep on your belly, it's bad for your back. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. It seems to be
right.
One of the nicer things. But okay. Moving on to technique, like the sumo versus conventional. I thought you had a ton of great tips there. You talk about butt wink. I'm just kind of giving the listener a preview because they just got to buy the book to really get the value from this. But you go into the sumo versus conventional, butt wink, lifter's wedge, fixing weaknesses. And I wanted to draw a parallel there between your 10/20 life and gift of injury here. So is it a fair assessment if I say that this book is a bit more about addressing the movement pattern, whereas 10/20 life is more about addressing the strength deficit?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I think that the gift of injury is a little more detailed with the exact science to maintain the back position for the back injured athlete. So there's more nuances pertaining to that, especially with the squat and the deadlift. But I think that at the end of the day, the goal is still the same. We just changed the wording a bit. Again, 10-20 life being strength being the ultimate goal, and with gift of injury, the ultimate goal is maintaining that athletic resilience and then building strength. So it's just, we kind of mixed some of our cues together in gift of injury and kind of made it our own that way. And I think they're a bit better in gift of injury, honestly.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it went into some great detail there. And I saw a lot of Mel Siff just popping up over and over and over again. Chris turned me on to Mel Siff and just absolutely loved the guy. He was a friggin' genius and went away far too soon. So there's a lot of excellent coaching cues. You talk about training mindset and purpose and programming. The programming section was pure gold as well on page 116. There's just some things that, it's like, am I doing the right thing? Because again, like talking about, moving the pen or pencil on the desk, retraining your movement patterns, you get into your gym routine and then,
Yep.
you need to adjust when things change, but, you just kind of get into that routine and you often don't do that when it's required.
Yeah, I'll ask someone when they're doing something just to kind of test them out. It might be at a seminar asking them what they do to warm up, or it might be at a gym I'm visiting and they're doing something that may be common or maybe something rare. And just to kind of see where they're at with their training, I'll ask them, why are you doing that? And more times than not, they don't really know. They don't have a real explanation as to the purpose of why they're doing that. And that's a problem.
Definitely. Which I think it's a great segue to SEAL Pilates on the ground. You've reached the end of episode 151 of the Limit Slayer podcast with Brian Carroll. On the next episode, we'll pick up where we left off. In addition to SEAL Pilates, we're going to be going into greater depth on the topics covered with Brian today. So thanks again, Brian, for joining us. You can find the transcript of our interview, links to Brian's other podcasts, products, resources, my one-page summary of the gift of injury, and more at limitslayer.com/Brian Carroll. That's BrianCarroll. If you enjoyed this episode and want to spread the love, you can make our day by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes and telling others what you love about this podcast. And finally, to get the most out of this series, please check out the show notes or go to Brian's website, which is powerrackstrength.com, and get your copy of The Gift of Injury. Till next time, thanks for listening and stay mighty.